Welcome to the Miami Heat Zone podcast. Now, I am your host, Martel Llewellyn. Guys, we're pushing up 4,000 subscribers. Now, if you have not yet subscribed to the channel, just hit that subscribe button and thank you for all the support. So, today I have two special guests, and they are from Off the What? What's your
Off
podcast name
ball
again?
takes.
Off
Off.
Ball Takes.
Yes,
So,
sir.
all right, guys, they're going to do a quick intro and then we're going to talk Miami Heat basketball. Go ahead. You guys can start.
I'm Yarby Laws from Off Ball Takes. We're pretty much a brand new podcast. We've only been doing it for a year now. Small, growing, but we talk general NBA stuff. You guys can find our socials, Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast. We post shorts and stuff like that. But it's just general NBA talk.
Yeah. We do new episodes every Monday and Friday, basically, so twice a week. And like you said, in addition to the socials, we also have a Discord too for people to join. That kind of lets also people like get a closer look at some of the stuff we do and get regular content updates as well.
All right, perfect. So if you guys are on my channel, all my subscribers need to go to their channel and subscribe. All of their links, the Discord, it's all going to be in the bio. Once you guys are done, or actually pause this video and go to their channel and subscribe. All right.
Yes, please.
All right. So we're going to talk some Miami Heat ball. So the first question is, what do you guys think about Bam Adebayo? Like, I know there's a lot of Heat fans that want him traded or they think he's soft. What is your opinion on Bam Adebayo?
So I guess if you want me to go first, I mean,
Yeah.
I think honestly, he's having, I think, a really good season. I mean, he was their lone all-star this year, right? He's averaging 20 and 11 a game, 4 assists, right? So kind of career year in terms of numbers. I guess, if people are going to complain, maybe they don't like the efficiency, right? Where it's like 51% from the field compared to, previous years, he's like 55, 57 from the field. But I mean, to be honest, I mean, like, I kind of look at it from the perspective of like, you're not probably going to get too many other bigs, that do a lot of what he does, better than that realistically, right? Because, when you rank him as a center, I mean, most of the centers that most people would put above him, you're just not going to get, say like a Jokic, right? Like an Embiid, AD, whomever you want to put up there. So, I mean, I guess if you're looking at it from a contract perspective, like if it doesn't work out and like the window's starting to close, maybe you look at splitting the contract up. But I mean, for right now, I mean, he's one of your younger guys, right? Jimmy Butler's a little bit older. So, I mean, to me, I don't really see a real reason to, give him up at this point. I mean, unless something goes horribly wrong, where he just starts to regress, but that wouldn't make any sense. He's gotten better every year. But I do understand, like, maybe you would like him to take some more of the reins offensively, but that's why you got the other guys on the team, for shot creation and offense as well. I mean, so, and I think, he can also unlock some of those other guys, right? Because if you replace him with some other, just regular mid-level starting center big, you're not going to get some of that, right? You're not going to get the dribble handoffs. You're not going to get some of the passes he makes, setting guys up. So I think he's got a pretty good chemistry. So I wouldn't do it anytime soon. I mean, I just wouldn't do it right now anyways, unless you have the ability to get like a top tier guy that's, better, but for right now, we haven't heard anything about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Bam is underrated in my opinion. I think he's one of the better big men around nowadays. And I feel like big men are kind of rare, and especially what he's able to do. He's efficient, 51% from the field, and then the 3-pointer. That's kind of the issue that I have sometimes with him. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's definitely not. And this year it really hasn't been. But regardless, he's putting up like 20 and 10. So I just think he's one of those guys that's like severely underrated. He impacts the game offensively and defensively. I think he can do a lot with the ball. I think the only issue that I would really have outside of the 3 ball is probably his fit next to some other guys. I think it would be intriguing to see him not on a different team, but maybe on the same Miami Heat team with some different guys around him. Maybe somebody else other than Jimmy Butler. I don't know, because I know that a lot of Heat fans really do enjoy Jimmy. He's their culture pretty much. So it'd be hard to move on from him. But I just don't know what Bam's pinnacle of his career is going to be on the, Miami Heat team as it's currently constructed. That's what I would say. But I think he's one of the, better guys in the league.
Right. Because I'm looking at it from the perspective, too, of like, he probably can't be the best player on a championship team, but could he be one of your 3 best players? I would say, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, I wouldn't get rid of him anytime soon. Like I said, unless you have the option of, hey, you're trying to get like a top 5 or 10 player and you might have to send Bam in there as part of the package. But otherwise, no.
Yes, absolutely. So when it comes to Tyler Hero, he takes a lot of flack. Like a lot of people say he's not athletic or he's a terrible defender. Don't get me wrong, he is a good scorer at sometimes. I just think his efficiency is probably the biggest thing. So what do you guys think about Tyler Hero? Because he's always on the trading block. However, it's always the third best guy who always
Right.
gets traded. Obviously, they're not going to trade Jimmy or Bam. So what's your opinion on Tyler Hero? And do you guys think the Miami Heat will keep him going forward?
So, I mean, the funny thing with is like you said with Tyler Hero, he's been in trade rumors, pretty much every year for the last, few years. And, in a way it makes sense in regards to who they've been tied to, right? Like, say Kevin Durant. Yeah, you're gonna give up Tyler Hero for Kevin Durant. Lillard, obviously he's in a little bit different tier, right? Because he's not quite a top 10, top 5 guy, but he's still a guy where it's like, there are some guys you're okay with giving up in order to, bring in what he provides for you. But, I guess, the thing is with Hero is that, like, again, it's kind of another one of those guys where the higher his usage or role is, probably your team is not going to be quite as good. You may not have as high of a ceiling. So, I mean, he's still a good player, right? Because, again, he's averaging 20 a game, 5 assists, 5 rebounds generally, right? Like you said, the efficiency's not great. He is a really good 3-point shooter. He does fit well with Bam. But I think at the very least right now, you just kind of have to see what it looks like in the playoffs. Because again, like Terry Rozier's out, right? That was a guy that they got in, that they brought in to replace Kyle Lowry. So you kind of want to see like, okay, Terry Rozier is your point guard. You still have Jimmy. You still have Bam. So that hopefully would kind of put Hero in a spot where you're not quite as reliant on him offensively. So that way, like, it doesn't come down to, okay, he's the, one of the only guards we have that can break guys down off the dribble to some extent. Now you have a little bit more diversity in your offense. So I think for now, you just kind of have to wait and see. But I can understand, like, the concerns because, he is a guy that it does seem like in the postseason, his numbers don't quite match what they are in the regular season. And it's one thing, like, if it's, like a little bit worse because, there's only a handful of guys where, their playoff numbers are better than their regular season numbers. But, when you look at some of these other numbers, right, it's a big drop off. Where he's down like into the low teens and he's shooting like 40% from the field. And then last year they got to the finals, pretty much without him. So, I mean, again, like if another star comes up, he's going to be in trade rumors because I mean, when you look at the contracts, he's one of the only guys on the team that's got a pretty sizable contract. And he's not Jimmy, right? You're not moving Jimmy, and Bam's probably not going to be moved for anybody significant either. So, that's kind of how I look at it. Like he's a good player, but probably a guy where if he's one of your, 3 best guys, you might want somebody a little bit better in between. But it gets hard because of the contracts.
Yeah, I think he's a good player, but my main issue with him would probably be the injury history. He does get hurt a lot, and it seems to be at the worst times. Going into the playoffs, second half of the season, I'm not mistaken, he's hurt right now. So that does not help his
Yeah,
case here.
Right
he
But
just got hurt.
exactly, and I think it was like a hyperextension. But I guess the other thing would be the contract. That's kind of a non-starter for me as well. It reminds me of the Jordan Poole contract where you don't really feel good about having a player who can be a little bit shaky at times, inefficient. But he does have that shock factor. The thing that I do like is, his game can be translated to an X factor where, if he shows up when you need him, like you're probably going to win the game. That's how I feel about him. But how often is he going to show up? He's very inconsistent sometimes. Coupled with the injuries, it just doesn't help his case. So I could see him being like a piece, in a trade package down the line if you guys are trying to get another star, which is probably going to happen because you guys missed out on Dame. And his name was like all over, the package for that. So it's going to happen again. But I feel like you also can live in a world where you don't feel too bad if you keep him. That's how good he is at times. But regardless, I think you should probably keep him around because he's what in year 5 now. So
Yep.
the potential, he has a lot of
23.
potential. Yeah,
23.
he has a
Yeah,
lot of
so
upside. Like he's one of those
right.
kind of players that if you keep him around and develop him in the right way and let his game come to him, I think you might have yourself, a future superstar.
Right, because like ideally for a team like the Heat, you do have some cagey veteran guys, but you also kind of would like to balance that out with some youth in there, so that way you're not completely relying on those guys, just in case guys have to miss time, or whatever. Even though Hero misses time as well, but it is kind of tricky because again, with the CBA and the fact that like some of these teams in the second apron don't have as much flexibility. Some of these teams are going to look at some of these other guys that aren't one of their two best players that are making like 25, 30 million a year or whatever, and they're like, yeah, you might have to be the guy that we sacrifice in order to potentially either extend our window or increase the ceiling.
All right, so you guys mentioned just building a proper roster around the Miami Heat. What do you guys think about the Miami Heat always getting undrafted guys? Because sometimes it seems it's like, man, we have a 6'5", small forward next to Bam Adebayo, or they just don't really build around the Miami Heat as they should. So, what do you guys think about the Miami Heat's undrafted guys and the success that they've seen? And to be honest, I think because of the success, it's been a detriment to why they haven't improved the roster.
Right. Yeah. I guess you kind of look at it from the perspective of, yeah, it kind of goes into the culture where, their mindset is we're a very hardworking team, right? Everybody's always got, everybody has something to prove on the roster, right? A lot of these guys were guys that were either cast offs or, like you said, literally undrafted, low draft picks, whatever. But I guess like the issue is that like then you also have to factor in once you go into the playoffs, sometimes, if you have to rely on undrafted guys, sometimes you kind of get what you're asking for, right? When you look at, some of these guys that have helped them in the past, right? Guys like, Max Strus, um, Gabe Vincent or whomever else, right? Like, then you also have to factor in, if they have a bad game, well, then you're also like, well, they may not necessarily be quite in that tier. But for a team like the Heat, again, where the financial situation is different, because again, they're one of those teams that's big into the tax and whatnot. It's nice to be able to find those type of guys, and you never know. Some of those guys can be able to stick and play really well, but then if they do play well, then you're going to be priced out. Say like
Yep.
if Max Strus or a Gabe Vincent plays well in the playoffs, right? You may not be able to afford to keep them, but then you also have to factor in, okay, is there a possibility that maybe they mainly are really, really good because of the team that they're on? Versus
Yeah,
like,
that's
if they
true.
go elsewhere, like they have the reputation, say like a guy like a Kendrick Nunn, because I'm a Lakers fan, so I remember like he played very well for the Heat, and then he goes to LA, and now he's out of the league, right? Basically, like 2 years later. Even a guy like a Gabe Vincent, he hasn't played at all. I mean, injuries is a part of it. Max Strus obviously is doing fine in Cleveland, but if you're the Heat, how good do you feel about like, yeah, we're probably okay with not giving him like 4 years, 64 million or whatever, and
Yeah,
just kind of
it's
using that
crazy.
to kind of elevate other guys like a Haywood Highsmith, or maybe giving more minutes to like a Jovic or signing Josh Richardson, right? Because like Josh Richardson can do some of the stuff that Max Strus can do as a shooter, maybe not quite as well, but he can defend, and other things like that. So I mean, in general, I mean, it kind of goes into the culture so it fits. And again, having that advantage of we can always find guys available that can be a big part of our rotation, even with the limitations that we have financially, like that's a skill. And that's
Yeah.
something that not a lot of teams outside of Miami have. It's just you still have to factor in again, like, sometimes come playoff time, some of those guys that may look good in the regular season may kind of fizzle out sometimes. And then you kind of left with like, well, what else can we really rely on? But, for now, I mean, like, it's worked. Because again, Miami's been to the finals, what, 2 out of the last 4 seasons, and they could have easily gone to a third one, against the Celtics. What was it in 2022? So, I mean, don't change it if it's working. And like they've been able to get a lot out of those guys. And, I think part of that also just has to do with Eric Spoelstra as well. And the culture that, Miami, Pat Riley, and everybody's been able to kind of just, instill. Because again, like that's cool. Because I mean, like, again, there's not a whole lot of teams where you can say, yeah, we have undrafted guys that can be
For real.
legitimate pieces in a playoff rotation. I mean, not a lot of teams can say that. I mean, like, some teams may have one, but the fact that you can have those guys on small contracts, it helps, and it helps to extend the window because it's just, again, once they play well, you may not be able to keep them, but you can always bring other guys in. So that's a plus.
Yeah. I never felt that like Miami was one of those teams where, they built their entire roster around talent. It was more so built around hard workers. And that's kind of like where you see hard work sometimes does beat talent, especially in the East. But like, you have to feel good about the guys that you do bring in, the season guys, like even a Hawkes, like where he's a rookie, but he looks like, a fourth year guy because of all of his experience in college. I know he's not undrafted, but even like a guy like Duncan Robinson, we've seen him have some heroic moments as well. So, I just feel like it's just a part of the culture. You want to build a sense of winning, and hard workers. I think their number one goal is to win. They don't really care about the stats per se. Like, you even see, like, I feel like every time that you guys make a playoff run, we see somebody like, I don't know, Caleb Martin come out of nowhere, and he's like an unsung hero for a series. Or like I said, I think Duncan Robinson had one of those back in the bubble, I believe. But that's just kind of the culture that you guys have built, and I think it would be hard to move on from it. But I do understand like people's concerns where you do have a ceiling, because are you going to win with it? Like, it's cool to make appearances in the finals, but are you going to actually win the championship with that kind of mindset? You don't know, because it's sometimes talent does beat hard work as well. Like, it could go both ways, where you could do as much as you can, but somebody's just going to hit more shots. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like a double-edged sword, I guess, where you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons of each. But I wouldn't really be thinking about breaking up this roster entirely, or changing, the way that you guys operate, because it's worked, very well in recent years. So that's kind of where I stand on it.
All right. So with the Miami Heat, they're currently in the 7th spot, and with about 20 or so games left, where do you see the Miami Heat really just stacking up like in the playoffs? Right now, the Milwaukee Bucks, Doc Rivers, he's crying about the team. And to be honest, I don't even know why he took the job, because all he's saying is just all these negative things. With Embiid being out, I don't really see him coming back. So Philly's really not going to do too much. Now it's really only like the Boston Celtics and the New York Knicks and the Miami Heat. So where do you see the Miami Heat? Do you guys see them making it to the Eastern Conference Finals, the finals? Where do you see the Miami Heat stacking up in this Eastern Conference?
So that's kind of the tough part in terms of evaluating the Heat, because it's like, you mentioned those teams, aside from Philly, obviously, like Milwaukee and Boston, they're in the top 3, and the Miami Heat are not in terms of the standings, but we've seen them be able to, overcome, that, and be able to kind of, outsmart teams in the playoffs, right? Like when you watch them last year against the Celtics, right? Like, yeah, obviously some of that was guys like Caleb Martin and Duncan Robinson and Jimmy Butler going off, but then some of it was also outsmarting. Like, hey, we can beat you by playing a zone defense, and we're just going to limit you basically to outside shots for the most part, because we know you're not going to try to drive too much to the paint. And if you knock down a bunch of threes, okay, but we don't know if we're going to trust it. So I think that's the tough part to evaluate. But, when you look at it, I think some of it's going to factor in, like you said, where do they finish in the regular season? I mean, their strength of schedule, they have one of the easier remaining schedules left, right? I think, according to like Tankathon, they're 26th in terms of strength of schedule. So, obviously that means they have a chance to move up. They've also been hurt a lot this season. So that's the other factor where we haven't seen a whole lot of games with them at full strength, because even Terry Rozier, not long after he got traded, he gets hurt and he hasn't played in a little while. So we don't necessarily right now know how good the team at full strength can be as they kind of figure it out and figure out, who's going to play, who's going to get minutes. Some of that's just going to come down to like, who do they match up with? And I feel like that's kind of when we talk on our podcast, that's a big part of who, is going to go as far as they can, because now that the league is a little bit more, equal, I guess, in terms of parity and talent, some of these lower seeds may have a chance to be able to improve. I think they definitely could, especially, again, like you mentioned with Philly and Embiid. We have no idea when he's coming back. Even if he does come back, is he going to be the same? Probably not, unless something miraculous happens. So if you catch a team like Philadelphia in the first round right there, the 5 seed, let's say the Heat get up to 6 and avoid the play-in, and they play, maybe Cleveland, right? Maybe Milwaukee wins a few games, to get to 2 and Cleveland's at 3. Miami could definitely take out Cleveland in the first round. If they play Philly, they would probably beat Philly, especially if Embiid doesn't play, or is hobbled. Boston's kind of the tough one just because, again, so far they've been the best team in the East record-wise. But then you also have to factor in Porzingis, right? He's kind of the X factor for Boston. He's a guy where when he plays and he plays well, that's when they're really tough to beat. But, can you trust him to stay healthy? So there's definitely a scenario where the Heat could be, in the Eastern Conference Finals again. It's going to be tougher. Obviously, just because, what's, with Boston being better. But at the same time, there's definitely a pathway for it. It just may come down to, like, they may need a little bit of a break from some of these other teams in terms of the matchup. Because, like, if you're the Heat and you're, in the play-in and you're the 8th seed and you play the Celtics in the first round, if you're the Heat, I'm sure the players may not feel bad about it. But just, like, in general, that's not, like, a great matchup.
Who would want that matchup? Yeah, round 1.
No.
Right, exactly. But if you're, again, some other seed, right, and you can play, like I said, Cleveland in the first round, or the Knicks or Philly or something like that, or even Orlando, whatever. Like, that's a scenario where you could do it. I mean, again, the schedule's easy, so as long as they're healthy, they should win most of their remaining games. So they're 8 right now, and they're only a couple games back of 6. So it's kind of more so like, can they beat out Orlando and Indiana? If they're healthy, they probably can. Um, and again, like in a 7-game series, sometimes it also comes down to who the best guy in the series is, right? And that's why I think they could take out some of those teams, because Jimmy Butler, when he's on a heater, he can be the best player on the floor in a playoff series, in a 7-game playoff series. So it may be tough to get out of the East. But I definitely think at the very least, Eastern Conference Finals is doable, because again, we've seen them be able to pull it off in the past as an underdog. So they could do it. It just comes down to like, it's matchups really at this point. Because again, like if you're the 8 seed, you don't feel great about it. But if you're the 6 seed, you're okay. But you may not feel as good about it if you have to play, like the Bucks versus like Cleveland. Because there is a world, even with the Bucks kind of not playing as well, there is a world where like maybe come playoff time, they kind of figure it out and they end up looking a lot better than they've looked as of late. Because Middleton's hurt. But at the same time, again, all you can do right now is really just win. So I think there definitely is a chance for them to get to the Eastern Conference Finals. It just may be harder for them to come out of the East this time around. And then even, and then let's say they get out of the East, out West, the West is very tough. When you look at all the teams out there, there's a lot of really good teams. I mean, you can go all the way down to like, there's basically 10 teams that are all solid playoff teams. Obviously, how good they are, kind of depends on, the given night. But, that's the tough part. Like let's say if Denver, right? Denver was the 1 seed last year. Now they're 4. So, if it's not Denver, right? Maybe like if there's a world where like Minnesota comes out of the East, if you're Miami, maybe you can say, okay, it's a big team. We don't have quite as much size as Minnesota, but we do have some of the experience that they don't have as a group, to maybe be able to upset them, or a team like Oklahoma City. Clippers may be tough because they have experience. Obviously, you got to factor in health for them. But yeah, so I mean, like you can't completely count out the Heat. I mean, I know people do it every year, but they're always going to be one of those teams where, like, would it shock me if they're in the Eastern Conference Finals? Probably not. It would surprise me, I think, if they got to the NBA Finals, but it kind of surprised me that they got to the finals last year. So there's definitely a shot. You can never fully count them out, and I think that's kind of what we have to learn with Miami, especially now, because again, you kind of need to see how this new talent comes in and fits. Because again, what if Terry Rozier, pops off in a 7-game series? What if there's a series where they're, down, 3-2? Terry Rozier scores like, 10 points in the fourth quarter to kind of get it back, and maybe they pull out a game 6 and then pull out a game 7 victory. You just never know. So I do like, some of the pieces. It's just a matter of I would like to see it fully healthy for a stretch. And then I think we can probably get a real sense of like, okay, maybe they might actually be even better than we thought. That's kind of the tough part, because some of these teams have dealt with a lot of injuries, and the Heat is one of them.
Yeah, you can never count them out though. That's the thing that's like scary about this team. As long as Jimmy Butler's on this team, come playoff time, you can literally never count them out. I would say like this Miami Heat team is a little bit different than last year. You do have guys that you just got like DeLon Wright, and then obviously Terry Rozier. I think those two guys could be pretty big X factors. I know DeLon Wright is more of a defensive minded guy, but I think that's better than Kyle Lowry, who's pretty much in his last final years in the NBA.
Yeah,
so I think that's a huge upgrade. Exactly. So it's a huge upgrade. And then obviously Rozier, that'll help offensively, because what if he explodes out of nowhere? But another thing that I think puts the Heat over a lot of these teams in the East and why they're the sleeper, I think, is definitely Eric Spoelstra. I think he'll definitely be able to outcoach a lot of people, including Doc Rivers. Like, we could see Doc Rivers have another self-implosion where, Spo is kind of just picking his mind apart. But yeah, I could see that happen pretty much with any team except for maybe Boston. I don't know. Boston is like tough to watch because they're one of those teams where you look at the record and you're like, okay, they're pretty much unstoppable, but you could also see them completely self-implode as well. But I think the Heat, they're just chasing Indiana and Orlando. You can't be in the play-in if you're the Heat. You definitely want to be, around that 6th spot. I feel like if you're in the 7 or 8, I feel like that's a little bit of a danger zone, because you might potentially blow the play-in game, and then your season's done. But we'll see. And I think the ceiling for this team would probably be conference finals. I just don't know if they have what it takes to get past Boston this year because Boston is so elite. Um, but at the same time, if Bam elevates, if Tyler Hero's healthy, if Jimmy Butler elevates, hey, we could be looking at another Miami Heat, finals. But I just don't
Right.
Yeah,
know who they would beat in the West. That's the problem. But
Right.
that's
And
the
then
they
like
have
problem.
so much
and
upside.
yeah, and even when you factor in the coaching, like say against Joe Mazzulla, right? Like I think if you're the Heat, you feel probably good about that. Just in the
For
sense of
sure.
like that's
Joe
the guy
Mazzulla.
in his second year as a head coach. You just beat him last year in the playoffs, although it's a different team. So that's the thing is that all these teams have so many different X factors. Because again, with Boston, we already talked about it. We know Porzingis is probably the biggest X factor for them, and the Heat have a lot of they have way more than one X factor. And there is a world where like you said, if a bunch of these guys play really well, that's going to help. It's just again, say against a team like a Boston, right? Their guards, how are they going to respond? Physically to the Miami guards, right? Because they do have an athleticism and size advantage, over the Heat guards, because Rozier is a smaller guy, even though Hero's 6'5" or whatever, right? He's got short arms and not super athletic. So that's the part there. And then, again, it just comes down to the superstars as well, right? Because again, we've seen Jimmy Butler be able to outplay, some of the other best guys, in a 7-game series. It's just a matter of, again, can he do it, but also have some of these other guys come along with him? And, if they do, right, that's where you may be able to pull off an upset. Because again, it's like with Boston, it's like what Yarby said earlier about the talent, right? Like Boston is the most talented team in the Eastern Conference, but how does that translate once we actually see them in the playoffs in a 7-game series, right? They're still going to have to execute. They're still going to have to beat and overcome, some of these things that they've had to deal with the last few years. Obviously, they've been to the finals, right? They haven't been able to get over the hump yet, but that's always in the back of your mind, right? Because again, if it comes down to a game 6, game 7, right? And it's very close in the fourth quarter. How does Boston respond? How does Miami respond? Because we've seen Miami be able to pull out, these tough, upset wins, at different points, right? Because I remember last year, when Boston came back and tied the series up, right? Everybody basically was of the mindset like, yeah, Miami's going to lose. They
It's
just
over.
lost a tough game 6 at home on a Derek White putback. They're done, right? They're mentally just completely fried. And then they blow him off the floor. I mean, I know Tatum hurt his ankle, but still, you could kind of feel early on in the game, even when Tatum was out there, like, yeah, the Heat are mentally prepared for like, yeah, we're going to still try to win this game. And they kick Boston's tail. So, I mean, that's the thing with all the resiliency. That's why you can never count them out. It's just tougher this year because the league is a lot better. And again, even if you get out of the East, who are you going to play in the Western Conference? And that could determine some things. Because I think, like I said, if you go against one of the lesser experienced teams, you have a decent shot at maybe pulling off the victory, even though they're going to have home court advantage and the better record and whatnot. But if it's one of those other teams like the Nuggets or the Clippers, that's where it may get kind of tough. That's the thing we don't know about because again, in the Western Conference, right? Like I said, last year Denver had the best record. They're the defending champs. Now they're the 4 seed. So and again, like usually it's kind of tough for a top 3 seed to not make it out of the West, right? We've seen Miami do it before twice. But in the Western Conference, it's generally been one of the top seeds. So, that's going to be, I think, the fun part for Miami during this latter part of the season is, getting healthy, figuring everything out, and then taking that into the playoffs with a coach that you can trust, to execute and get guys to buy in. Because that's the other part. Because, again, if it's another coach, right, and they lose with that Derek White putback, there's a world where the team kind of just quits and just kind of gives up, where they're just frustrated and they're like, man, we were right there. And some coaches like may not be able to pull the guys together, right? But Spoelstra clearly can. So that's the fact. You got Jimmy, you got Spoelstra, so you have a championship caliber coach, and you have a guy that can elevate his game in the playoffs. But can you pull it all together to take on this complete gauntlet of teams in the playoffs this year? That's the tough part.
All right, so guys, thank you so much for just for coming on the channel. Subscribers, please go to Off Ball Takes. Go to their channel, hit the subscribe button, comment, all that stuff. Please go follow these guys. Hopefully, we can do another episode around Wednesday or so. But like I said, thank you guys for coming on. And guys, go to their channel, subscribe to their channel, and show them some support. All right, please leave my name right like in their comment section so they know that you guys are coming from this channel. And thank you for all the support. Thank you.